Sup y'all, welcome back to the review space. In this video, I want to take a look at the top 10 reasons why AEW, All Elite Wrestling, will not beat WWE. They can't beat them, they can't defeat them ultimately in the end, and they'll ultimately fail against Vince McMahon's promotion. So I think that this whole AEW thing, I want to give you guys my opinion regarding this AEW new promotion, new company by the Khans and the Young Bucks and Cody and all that. But I want to give you guys a realistic overview, basically my reasoning for why I think this company is not going to last against the WWE. And it's basically just, as much as many people are behind this company and there's a lot of hype behind it and people are very, very excited, I think it's very important to have a very realistic and a very almost like a cynical outlook too, because I've seen companies come and go. I'm saying I've been around for over 30 years, over 3 decades. I'm about to turn 32 later this year, so when I see a new company start up, I'm very cynical. I have a lot of doubts regarding the company. This doesn't mean that I want the company to fail. It doesn't mean that I want AEW to, fail against the WWE or go out of business. And I actually do want them to succeed. I want these guys to have a lot of success and really stand up against the WWE and become a really solid alternative, if not number one, then a solid number 2 company in North America. I do want them to become a big company and become very successful and get over and make a lot of money. But in my opinion, these are the top 10 reasons why AEW simply can't beat the WWE. Alright, reason number one. Reason number one is they won't get high ratings because there's an overall lack of demand for professional wrestling in the first place. This is bad. Not a lot of people like wrestling nowadays. It's 2019. This isn't the late 90s anymore when it was the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. Back in the day, you had ECW, WCW, WWF, and they were all getting pretty darn good ratings. Like, a lot of people were interested in wrestling because the product was different. The product was marketed towards young adults and a college age demographic, 18 to 34 demographic, the young men and women, and it was a very cool product back in the day, and the product was edgy. It was for more mature audiences. They had swearing, they had comedy, they had, good looking women, and it was very titillating, and everything about it back in the day was so much more interesting and fascinating. They had actual characters and great promos back in the day. And now, because of pro wrestling being so stagnant, especially with the lackluster WWE product, which is the most mainstream visible product out there, and has been for the past, 18, 19 years, the young kids today aren't really watching wrestling anymore. Like little kids and young kids as like 10, 11, 12 years old. Back in the late 90s, I was that young kid. We were that generation of late 90s viewership. I was 11, 12, 13 years old back in the day, 1998, 1999, early 2000. And we were very interested, and a lot of people liked it. A lot of young kids in elementary school and in high school love pro wrestling. Now that's not so much the case. I mean, you don't really see a lot of young kids interested in it, or you don't see a lot of young kids wearing or rocking wrestling T-shirts. Even back in the day, like you go to school, everybody was rocking a wrestling shirt. Like the cool kids were rocking wrestling T-shirts. Their favorite wrestlers: Austin, Taker, DX, NWO, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, it's extremely rare to see like a young person wearing a wrestling shirt. I mean, even in public, it's very rare, and they tend to be those kind of people that like wrestling. It's very much, it's become a niche audience. It's become a very small demographic. And unfortunately, WWE's biggest demographic right now are actually older men, who grew up in the 80s and 90s. Like the people that's like in their late 30s and early 40s, and maybe even their early 50s. Like people that grew up at a time when it was really, really hot. Hogan and Savage and, Austin and Rock, back at a time when it was really cool. And it's now the biggest fan base are those older people that used to mark out to it back in the day, but they don't really have a lot of younger fans anymore. That's a huge problem. And another big factor is that most of AEW's fan base are basically over the internet. You know, these smart mark fans that are more likely to really just stream the TV shows or the AEW shows instead of actually watching them on television. So that's why I think that AEW is just not going to get a lot of high ratings. Yeah, they might get like 10,000 tickets sold. You know, 10,000 people will show up to All In, or maybe even more than that at this new upcoming pay-per-view they have. What is it called again? It's All In, the one at Vegas. All In Part 2, whatever the heck it was. And I just don't think it's going to get a lot of high ratings when the TV show starts coming in, because it's not going to have that hype behind it. You know, most people are just not interested in wrestling. Yeah, you can have 10,000 tickets sold or 15,000 people in the arenas, but just because you have 15K, 10K people that want to spend money on a ticket, it doesn't mean that you're going to have, you know, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million people that want to watch wrestling again. I mean, AEW is going to be very lucky to have like TNA ratings, you know, when they start appearing on TV. They'll be very lucky to get like 1.2, 1.3 ratings. Alright, reason number two. Number two, they don't have any huge stars that feel important or that come off interesting or must-see. They don't really have any must-see stars. They don't got no big stars anymore. And wrestling in general just doesn't have big stars anymore. Like, for example, when they brought out Chris Jericho in the first rally in Jacksonville. You know, Jericho is he's an old veteran. He's over the hill. He's way past his prime. And then you have the second rally that featured Kenny Omega. You know, so Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho, those were the two like biggest names that they can come up with in these big rallies. And you have Kenny Omega, this virtually unknown guy in the American mainstream. Nobody knows about this guy. Nobody cares about Kenny Omega. Aside from like the die-hard, super nerdy, like super niche, like New Japan fans. Or like the people that follow Dave Meltzer. You know, these people that are like a very small portion of the audience that really follow that stuff, that follow his matches against Okada and the Bullet Club and all that stuff. But not a lot of people really care about Kenny Omega. What is his character? What is this guy's character? Like, is this guy as interesting as Hulk Hogan? Does he have the same mic skills as Stone Cold or The Rock? Is he as fascinating as any of those guys? I don't think so. You know, he's kind of a small guy. You know, he's maybe about 5'8" or 5'9". He does have a fairly muscular physique, and he's very athletic, but like that's about it. He's like one of these guys that's kind of like a vanilla midget type of guys. It's like jumping around. He does a lot of flips and high spots, but as far as his personality and mic skills, it's just kind of generic. There's nothing that stands out about this guy as far as this larger-than-life character. And then, again, with Chris Jericho, he's just way too old, and his best years are way behind him. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's had some good matches, don't get me wrong, and he can still have some decent matches every now and then. But the guy is just, he's not the kind of guy that you want to build a company around. You know, this isn't 1999 when he was just this new guy coming in from WCW, just underutilized, like, undercarder, mid-carder, cruiserweight, and then he comes in, you know, 20 years of work that he can offer to the WWF back in the late 90s. It's like he's way too old now. I think he's like coming up almost 50 years old now. So these guys aren't necessarily huge names that will draw in the casual audiences. And as a matter of fact, I think that most of the roster at the moment are built around indie names that the mainstream fans are just not going to be able to recognize. So, you know, again, they cater to a huge niche audience, the indie fan base, but they don't necessarily cater to a mainstream casual audience, and that's going to hurt them because most people that watch it, tune in, they're not really going to care about, like, okay, this guy's from the indies, who cares? We need somebody with a lot of charisma or somebody with a huge recognizable name that is very, very popular. Alright, reason number three. Number three, it is inevitable that AEW will start hiring more popular names as evident by their alleged talks or interest in current WWE or ex-WWE stars such as Randy Orton, Goldberg, maybe even a CM Punk, if they can make him crawl out of his, you know, hiding hole, or even somebody like Batista. You know, so, you know, going back to the name thing, I think that AEW will try to hire some of these big names, like these big-time veterans from the WWE especially. But the problem is that these older guys, they'll predominantly be interested in the huge paydays. So it's all about money to these guys. These guys has been around, like they put 10, 20, 15, 20 years already in the business. They already made their name and became huge stars in WWE, and they left for whatever reason, whatever circumstances. But I think instead of contributing their best in-ring effort to AEW, it's highly likely that these famous, more established names will just want to suck up AEW dry for the money, for the cash. That's what that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a payday for them. Like, I can get an easy check. I can exploit AEW. Similar to basically how the older veterans like Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Booker T and all these guys, Eric Bischoff, were able to exploit Dixie Carter and TNA back in the day. Back in 2010, 2011, and even before that. And basically take as much of TNA's money without really contributing much to the overall product. I think that's what's going to happen to AEW as well. If they can get somebody like a Randy Orton, somebody like a Goldberg, somebody like a CM Punk, Batista, whoever, like a former big-time WWE main eventer, and then they jump ship to AEW, yeah, maybe even like a Brock Lesnar. If they can get Brock Lesnar, that would be a big deal, but it's going to be about the money with those guys. Like, they're going to get a huge payday, but I highly doubt that they're going to give much to offer as far as like giving you an amazing match or something that's like must-see television, must-see matches, must-see moments. Like it's gonna be more like for the brand name. All right, reason number 4. They basically have an inferior women's division. All right, so this is pretty obvious. With the WWE's more highlighted focus on the female superstars in the past couple of years, and this, the Divas Revolution and all that stuff, AEW has a lot of catching up to do regarding the roster. Particularly having to find and sign quality female talent, not just from America, but from all over the world. I mean, AEW has the work cut out for them when it comes to the women's division. Not only does the WWE feature highly attractive, very photogenic looking faces like Mandy Rose and Alexa Bliss. The WWE, they also got tremendous in-ring performers. The in-ring work rate athletes like Charlotte, Asuka, Becky Lynch, Bayley, alongside a group of really believable MMA stars like Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler and the other couple of chicks that's, the 4 horsewomen of MMA. So they have a large roster full of women, very different looking, like people like Nia Jax, a big looking monster like her. But then they also have these quirky indie picks that you also find like in NXT especially, people like Kairi Sane and Nikki Cross and oh yes, that's right, the girl with the tattoos. I think she's facing, if I'm not mistaken, she's facing Ronda Rousey for Elimination Chamber. Ruby Riott. So with AEW, the very few attractive women that they only have right now are Brandy Rhodes and Penelope Ford. Like, that's all I can think of. And Brandy Rhodes, she's not really a great in-ring performer. She's very good looking, and then you have Penelope Ford, who I've never even heard her talk. I don't even know how good she'll be on the microphone. It seems to me like what's his name, Joey Janela or whatever, he's the one who's like the mouthpiece. He's the personality, but Penelope Ford is more of a lackey, female valet kind of thing going on. But she is very athletic, and she seems to have some abilities. But like as far as being an actual character, they're gonna need a lot more. Because the rest of the signings that they have with AEW is just a couple of indie names and some Joshi names, some Japanese female wrestlers. It seems like the AEW will be very inclusive. They'll have like, they feature this gay and transgender wrestlers, which is I guess it's a good thing. I mean, it's cool to have that inclusion aspect. They don't really discriminate, but they really need more interesting and beautiful and charismatic looking female wrestlers to even compete against WWE's women's division, to even rival and even come close to WWE's female roster. I think it's possible that one day AEW can have a better female roster. We've seen TNA Impact have, at one point they had the much better female division than WWE back in the day, but that was like, 10, 11 years ago. And there really is a good amount of, there's a huge amount of good unsigned female indie wrestlers out there that would benefit AEW's roster, and they're just unsigned. They're just out there having like independent matches. They're not even signed to WWE. So AEW might seriously want to look into some of those names. But right now, honestly, WWE is just way, way ahead of AEW's female division, and why would you want to watch AEW for the females when WWE is doing it a whole lot better? A whole lot better. All right, number five. Bad production values. This was a big, big problem for me, especially last year with All In from 2018. That All In event was just filled with production bugs and glitches and problems, and they just had a lot of like little things like regarding the mic and the audio regarding the crowd and all that, and the camera, the way that they shot the camera. It was just bad production quality. It was so poor. And even the AEW rallies that we've seen in Jacksonville and in Las Vegas, the production quality is so bad that the miking was off. The talent, when they were talking and cutting a promo, I could barely hear the audio. Like the audio would cut off when they were talking, and the music also isn't really that loud. It's kind of inaudible. Like when the wrestlers would come out and their theme song would play, and you could barely kind of hear it. Like it just the poor audio quality just turns me off, And unfortunately, this kind of gives off a very generic feeling to the overall show, and the audio quality is just a downgrade from the WWE. And we see these problems too with other indie shows. We see this with like New Japan having a crossover with Ring of Honor. Every time they do like a Ring of Honor NJPW crossover event, and it should feel like a big deal. It should feel like a big indie show. They also have those problems. They got these terrible production values. The camera work is bad. The audio is really, really bad. Like it's so B grade. It's so indie, amateur looking. It doesn't have that professional quality, incredible high production quality of the WWE, where it's like everything is top notch. Camera angles, the entrance music, the microphones, like everything is on point, just about perfect with WWE. So I think AEW is just gonna keep suffering. They're gonna feel so low grade and low rent compared to WWE. Number 6. Reason number 6 is they will inevitably lose their TV deal. Whether it's the TBS or TNT network or some other major network that they get, whatever it is, I think that in the future, inevitably, because I always judge it on the past. Like you judge everything based on what happened to other promotions in the past. We've seen it with TNA Impact. We've seen it with ROH, these other promotions that changed networks over the years. Even the WWE, they changed networks over the years, These TV deals, they inevitably end over time, and if AEW's ratings don't stay consistent, which I don't think they will ultimately lose the TV deal, and they won't have a home anymore. It's going to be like Global Force Wrestling, Nobody's going to want the product because you're not going to get those ratings. And I do understand that like the viewing habits have changed over the past 20 years. You know what I'm saying? Like people don't watch wrestling the same way they used to, and it's very hard to measure like the accurate people that view wrestling accurately, like the way that they stream it. Some people just illegally watch it on stream. They watch it on some Google. They go on Google and type in watch WWE or watch AEW, whatever event it is. Which is very common now. I think a lot of wrestling fans do it now. So even those ratings, it's gonna be hard to track them down. And I think that AEW is gonna need those consistent viewership where you can track it down. Hey, you got at least a couple of million people watching this every single week or every single couple of weeks or whatever time slot they have, whether it's on Tuesday nights or whatever. It's going to be kind of difficult to maintain over the next 5 to 10 years, a high viewership. Even if some people watch it online, like streaming, that's going to be like impossible to track down. Alright, so number 7. Reason number 7 is divided star power between the indie companies. And basically what I mean by this is that because AEW exists now, they're gonna basically keep dividing up whatever's available on the indies. And this is kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, these guys get a bigger payday from the cons and all that. Now they got, it's a major feel, bigger paydays, bigger contracts. They get more money basically. And the problem, though, is that these guys like the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Cody, and the rest of the Bullet Club guys, they became successful because they were able to market and branch out between, New Japan, between the American Indies, Ring of Honor, PWG, or whatever it is. They are able to go in between these different companies and markets. Because now it's only AEW. You're dividing up that market, you're dividing up that ability for these companies to collaborate and actually have joint shows and feel like a big deal. There was a sense of freedom and collaboration between, New Japan, Ring of Honor, these smaller companies that would band together and kind of have promotions, and they would kind of co-promote, But now that AEW is signing specific people into various exclusive contracts, and so they can't even branch out to other companies, especially not with the WWE. This will basically just hurt the drawing ability of these upcoming shows. Look at the Madison Square Garden, the upcoming show between ROH and New Japan. I mean, that was when they announced that last year. It's kind of a big deal. The ticket prices were pretty high, and people were willing to spend money on them because they featured, at least back then, last year, before AEW started, they featured some Bullet Club people. They featured Kenny Omega. They featured the Young Bucks. It was almost a guarantee that those guys would be there. And now the combined efforts and the smart mark appeal of these promotions are being divided because now, not only is it WWE that's snatching up many of the stars from PWG, ROH, the United Kingdom, Japan, all around the world, Mexico. Now you got AEW as well that will try to take these wrestlers as exclusive characters. They're gonna raid the talent and have these star power divided up, and so. The indies is going to be a lot weaker, I think. The indies is going to feel a lot less relevant and a lot less significant, unfortunately. They just don't have those huge draws anymore. And if New Japan and ROH can't have Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks or whatever, they can't have Hangman Page, they can't have these guys, then a lot less people will be interested in the other promotions and other companies like a New Japan or ROH or whatever, and that's going to damage and fragment the wrestling business even more. It's going to feel a lot less interesting, a lot less important, a lot fewer star appeal in the other companies. So ultimately, again, it's a double-edged sword. It hurts the other companies, even though the AEW contracted wrestlers will probably have a pretty decent contract, bigger payday, etc. Alright, reason number 8. Number 8, the theoretical upcoming AEW video game is not going to be any good. I just don't have any faith anymore when it comes to these video games. The last time that a rival wrestling company had a better video game than WWE was way back, over 2 decades ago. Back in 1998, there was a game called WCW vs. NWO Revenge for the N64. And that was a classic game. That's one of the best wrestling games of all time. It was outstanding, the graphics were good, the gameplay was phenomenal, and overall it was a much better product than whatever the hell WWF was putting out at the time. WWE had WWF Raw, WWF Attitude, those kind of games made by, I think it was made by Acclaim or something like that. Acclaim or Midway or, one of those crappy companies that put out the Mortal Kombat games. I'm not saying that Mortal Kombat is crappy, but the gameplay was so bad. They tried to make the fighting style more like Mortal Kombat. But with the WCW NWO Revenge and WCW video games, they used to have the in-game mechanics of Aki. Aki Corporation, which is a company, video game developer out of Japan, I think. And they had this groundbreaking grappling system. The grappling system was so addictive and so fun and easy to use, very accessible, and very influential. And by the late 90s, WWF or WWF back then, they ultimately partnered up with THQ THQ was, THQ and Aki, they ended up creating the WWF games, and so they ultimately replaced WCW. They took over from WCW, and WCW ended up with, I think Acclaim or something like. Wait, was it Acclaim? I don't even remember. Some other crappy developer publisher, and so, now they basically eliminated their biggest competitor. You know what I'm saying? So WWE, WWF back in the day, they took over the THQ Aki style of, Aki style grappling system. We saw that with WWF No Mercy and WWF WrestleMania 2000 and so on and so forth. And we can see that influence to this day with, the SmackDown vs. Raw games and the THQ games and the 2K, even the 2K games, WWE 2K17, 2K18, 2K19, etc. And then throughout the years, we've seen other companies like TNA, AAA, they had their own video games and they weren't very good. They were actually poorly received. They were just underwhelming. They were either like really mediocre or really, just kind of crappy. And we saw that in the 7th generation, particularly with the PS3 and Xbox 360. I actually have those games. I still have the TNA game from 2008, over 10 years ago, in AAA. The AAA Lucha Libre AAA Heroes del Ring, I think, from 2010. So I have those games, and they're not good games at all. They're very, very bone dry. Nothing special about them. Like, there's no depth to those games. They're very kind of slow-paced, uninteresting games. And also, too, like, they just, for some reason, they just can't get good developers. These other rival companies, they don't have, they're not able to hire video game developers that can make great wrestling video games. Like, those days of Aki is gone. And I wish that, if AEW is smart, they're going to have feature gameplay that's kind of similar to WWE, but even better. They're going to have, maybe they can hire Aki again. Maybe Aki will start making wrestling games again. I don't know. But if AEW was smart, and if they wanted to make a wrestling game that's going to work, then they're going to want to hire the Aki developers and have them make a wrestling game that's very similar to the old school, late 90s WCW, WWF games. They kind of sort of did that, I think, in the early 2000s with Def Jam Vendetta for the PS2, and I think it also came out on the GameCube. That was a pretty good game, and the gameplay was very fast-paced and very similar to Revenge and No Mercy in terms of the grappling system. It had that same addictive fast-paced, but the problem with Def Jam Vendetta was that it didn't have create a wrestler. You couldn't create your own championship, and it had very few modes. It only had a couple of modes. They didn't even have a Royal Rumble type of mode, or match types is very different. They didn't have any ladder matches or cage matches or anything like that. So, but with AEW, if they can get an Aki type of developer to have this incredible game, then that would be a success. But I just don't believe in that. I don't believe that AEW will get a really good developer publisher. They're not going to get a quality wrestling game developer. It's going to be kind of low rent and kind of crappy. It's going to have a lot less content than WWE 2K games. It's going to have a lot less match types. It's not going to have as many interesting modes, and it's going to have a very limited create a wrestler mode. Even if they do have a create a wrestler feature in it, so it's going to be very disappointing, I think. All right, reason number 9. Number 9. Unhappy wrestlers are inevitable and will ultimately want to end their AEW contract in the long run. We see this time and time and time again. Much like with every other promotion in the past, these signed talent, they end up becoming jaded, angry, bitter, and spiteful over time, and they feel underpaid, underbooked, and just generally unfulfilled in the company. Remember back in the day when Christian left? He left the WWE in 2005, and he jumped ship to TNA because he wanted to be an NWA world champion, right? He wanted to become a world champ and be pushed in the main event. And so he actually did that. He went and jumped ship, and he left the WWE. He moved to TNA. And then remember back in the day too, when Kurt Angle, he left for TNA. He left the WWE, went to TNA, became a champion. And all the countless exchanges between WWF and ECW and the WCW back in the 90s, like Taz jumping ship after becoming, he got tired and complacent in ECW, so he moved to WWE for the higher payday, and, he wanted basically a bigger platform. Guys like Chris Jericho. Remember when Chris Jericho, he moved from WCW to WWF? The Radicals, guys like Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero. And of course, the very infamous Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, NWO departure, back when they left the WWF and they moved into WCW, and it was very, very, it's to be expected, these people to ultimately get tired of their contracts in AEW after the next, 2 or 3 years. I mean, I think right now, what we're seeing right now is basically the honeymoon phase, right? The honeymoon era of AEW. Like, it's brand new right now. It's really fresh right now. So what we're seeing is this brand new, exciting novelty experience with these wrestlers. Like, we just got a new contract, new company. Yes, we're ready to take on the world. But, everything, so like everything is like really cheery and lovely and really hyped up and exciting at the moment because they're just starting out in AEW. It's fresh, it's new, it's different. But I can almost, like, it's almost a guarantee that inevitably a lot of these guys or some of these people, these stars that, AEW is going to end up making, that AEW is going to end up pushing, they're going to want to move somewhere else after they get sick and tired of AEW. After they get tired of it, after they ultimately want to leave and go somewhere else, and, because they think that the grass is greener on the other side. They think that the other company is better. So I can pretty much guarantee that AEW guys will want to move somewhere else, whether it's in the indies, back to the indies, or in New Japan, or in WWE, or whatever. Alright, reason number 10 is too much catering to the smarks. And this is a big problem. I think that AEW right now is catering way too much to the indie nerds, the SJW crowd, and basically the smart mark audience, instead of the more alpha male, like casual mainstream wrestling crowd. The casual people, like the college students, the young people, the people in their 20s and 30s, young men that like want to see some cool stuff. They just want an entertaining product. They want really cool male characters and really beautiful, like sexy female characters. And they don't necessarily want to see like an SJW type of product. They don't necessarily want to see a bunch of like indie nerd vanilla type of wrestlers that all they do is flips and dives. Just a bunch of flippity wrestlers. Or like it's all about inclusion. We're gonna have like gay characters. We're gonna have transgender characters, and that becomes more of like the focus instead of just having an entertaining product. I sense that AEW is gonna be very, very politically correct. And I don't think that's not necessarily a good thing if you're a wrestling company. If you cater too much to the PC crowd, that's going to turn off a huge portion of the mainstream audience. They just want an entertaining, an interesting and entertaining product, an entertaining TV show that's all about like, hey, I don't care. As long as it's funny, as long as it's comedic, as long as it's entertaining to the casual audiences. Unfortunately, I think AEW is going to be way too much catering to the smart mark fan bases. People that's basically considered like way too nerdy, and they take the stuff way too seriously. They take the in-ring work rate and 5-star wrestling matches and high spots and flips and dives and all that stuff. They're going to basically follow the Dave Meltzer, Brian Alvarez type of formula. That belief where you gotta be like a 10-star wrestler and everything has to be like a 20-minute, 30-minute match of attrition, And unfortunately, I think that's going to be the focus of AEW. It's not going to be so much about entertainment and having like funny segments, charismatic characters, amazing promos like, The Rock and Stone Cold and Scott Steiner back in the late 90s. I don't think it's going to be anything like that. I think it's going to be a lot more like an expanded version of like New Japan, or an extension of like Ring of Honor type matches, or PWG, or New Japan type matches. It's going to be more about the in-ring flippity dives and high spots. Unfortunately, it's going to feel like NXT. So, and the problem too with NXT is that they cater way too much to the smart mark audience instead of the casual audience. They need more entertainment and a lot less focus on the, flippity 5-star matches of attrition, the strong style, the in-ring work rate, 5-star 30-minute matches, and it's completely like this, basically this fake wrestling match, but you're trying to stretch it out for like 30 minutes. After a while, like, people get sick and tired of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? I mean, as much as I hate to admit it, the casual American fan base, they're not really gonna care too much about like Kota Ibushi coming in. Kota Ibushi from Japan tag teaming with Kenny Omega against like the Young Bucks or the Best Friends or whatever tag team, or these LGBT type characters that's being pushed as like these inclusive signals of virtue. When they start virtue signaling and like, hey, look at us, we're so inclusive. It's like, how about just delivering a funny, entertaining, gritty, hardcore product? For everybody, for the whole mainstream audiences, where you don't care about being PC, you don't care about offending people. It's all about entertainment. It doesn't matter if it's like, oh, maybe this demographic's going to be like offended by it. Who cares? Make it funny, make it entertaining, make it charismatic, make it something likable, make it something where people want to keep watching it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to cater to the SJW crowd. Forget the SJW crowd. Cater it to a casual audience, the mainstream audience. You got to have larger-than-life characters, people that have charisma and star power and celebrity-like presence, people like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage and, The Rock, Goldberg, Stone Cold, Scott Steiner, so on and so forth. These guys that are very entertaining. And I can keep going on. Unfortunately, like, I really don't see AEW hiring more of these kind of guys. Like, I don't see them hiring these larger-than-life or interesting personalities, people that have some kind of charisma. Because, unfortunately, I think, like, AEW, they're inherently booking from an indie, smart mark, like, mentality. Kind of like the Dave Meltzer type of mentality, that whole, like, independent, small guy, vanilla type of guys, 5'7", 5'6" type of wrestlers, but they can do flips and dives, guys like a Johnny Gargano, those kind of guys. It's going to be so streamlined for an AEW indie market. Unfortunately, it's not going to be for a mainstream market. That's really very, very. It's going to be disappointing. I think it's not going to be incredible. It's not going to be must-see TV. So that's it. That's my top 10 reasons why AEW, I think, will fail ultimately against the WWE. They're not going to succeed in the long run. I think they'll have some ratings here and there. I think that they will get some attention just because they're new and because of the novelty. And maybe they might even last a couple of years. Like, who knows how long they're going to last. But I just don't think in the long run they're going to be this incredible #1 promotion, because all the reasons that I mentioned, and I do want them to succeed. Like, again, don't get me wrong, I want these guys to be successful. I want them to be a big deal and have a great must-see product, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I have to be very realistic. We as wrestling fans, we got to be realistic about this promotion, because we can't just put all our hopes in this AEW stuff and then they fail and then we go, oh, crud, Like, look what happened to TNA. Look at what happened to Ring of Honor. Like, nobody cares about Ring of Honor. I mean, I respect Ring of Honor. I like ROH, but like, nobody cares about them in the mainstream. They're very, very niche, very indie. Nobody cares about New Japan, except for a few, like maybe a few thousand people in America have New Japan Network. But most people just don't care, because it's like they can't relate. They don't understand it. They don't understand the language. They just don't get it. It's not casual. It's not mainstream enough. And AEW, I think, is going to cater to that indie, New Japan, PWG, ROH crowd. The same thing with NXT. So there's really not much to look forward to, unfortunately. Alright, so that's it for this episode of The Review Space. Thank you guys for watching. This was a terribly way too long video, but I just had to get my opinion get out there. I had a lot of stuff to get off my chest regarding this AEW stuff. I haven't really talked about it yet, and also I haven't made a video in like 4 months or whatever, so I think it's about damn time. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. Click on the bell button for the latest notifications, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, peace.